And then the points that I mentioned are carried through our programmatic work. A couple of examples. With our policy and advocacy area, we're working tirelessly to improve early learning scholarships, which connect many children who have experienced or are experiencing trauma to quality, parent-aware, rated early childhood education programs. Access to scholarships provides a first step, but it's a very important first step as indicated by the following data points as we think about the statewide population of the children that are receiving scholarships. So currently, 60% of children that are receiving early learning scholarships have priority status. So this means that they have experienced or are experiencing homelessness, foster care, the child protection system, or a variety of other ACEs. 60% also identify as BIPOC, 50% are under the age of 3, and over 90% of the children are attending 4-star rated, parent-aware rated programs. A quick mention of something that you'll hear more later, but there is a potential for a loss of almost half of the available early learning scholarship funding in 2025. And we would love to have your partnership to minimally keep the funding levels where they are and ultimately to grow them so that we have no child on a wait list that is eligible for early learning scholarships. As I mentioned, scholarships are a first step, and the vast majority of scholarship recipient children are in 4-star rated programs. And there's a lot that can be done to improve parent aware. Specifically, there are things that the state can do to ensure programs are incorporating trauma-informed practices. One example would be to fully implement the Parent Aware Racial Equity Action Plan. Another area that we're directly influencing program quality is through around trauma-informed care is via Think Small Institute. We launched Think Small Institute a few years ago, trying to make sure that we could deliver high-quality content to educators to, again, make sure they have the skills, knowledge, and competence they need to support young children. There's a variety of programs in there, but one that I want to highlight was launched in partnership with United Way, Greater Twin Cities United Way, specifically the 80 by 3 initiative. We developed in partnership with them a comprehensive courses and initiatives focused on trauma-informed care and early education. This coursework, called From Hurting to Healing, has a variety of modules for a variety of audiences. First, the current audience is for center administrators and family child care providers, but we are now working on creating more modules for center educators themselves. We're really excited about the potential for this work and have many other areas about how to continue progress in this area. And with that quick overview, I'm excited to turn it over to the experts to introducing our first speaker, someone who is making a real difference in the world of children's mental health, Brandon Jones. As the Executive Director of the Minnesota Association for the Children's Mental Health, Brandon combines his professional expertise with a personal passion for helping young people thrive. A 2013 Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow, Brandon holds advanced degrees in psychology and community development. Brandon believes that every child deserves a chance to achieve mental wellness, and he works tirelessly to make that happen. Please welcome me and please join me in welcoming the incredible Brandon Jones.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. All right, so I'm gonna do some peering back and forth because our slides are here, so I may be reading from this screen as we go, and then for the folks who are joining us virtually, I'll make sure that you can hear me pretty well. So I'm Brandon Jones. I'm the Executive Director at MACMA, Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health. That is a mouthful, obviously. That's why we go by MACMA for short. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about what the research says and how we approach the development of young people. Trauma-informed care has become a buzzword over time. It's something that many organizations have applied, many people are familiar with, yet we still see the challenges with the development of young people. We still see the challenges with parents and caregivers. We also still see the challenges within communities when it comes to trauma. There's no easy solution to dealing with the trauma that we see, but there are a lot of strategies that we can implement. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about what the research is saying for some of those strategies. You heard my bio, not much more to add besides I used to be a clinician. Being a Black male therapist is like being a unicorn. Like we barely exist. And I still at heart am a clinician, but I'll be honest with you, I don't practice clinically anymore because I got burnt out. And it still kind of pulls at my heartstrings even today that I don't practice clinically anymore because people always reach out to me for some assistance. But what happened was in 2015 was probably when I realized something's not right here. And I was moving at a pace that was too quick. And I had my cape on way too tight. I was trying to save the community like no other. I thought I was going to be the psychological Superman. And I learned very quickly that it takes more than just one person. And well-being was important. And I remember sitting in my Jeep after a long shift. I was at Kente Circle. No shade to them. It wasn't Kente Circle's fault. But I probably got off my last client was probably ended about 7:30. And I remember I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to go do any paperwork. And I didn't want to listen to the radio. I didn't want to do anything. I was just sitting there. And I sat there for about 40 minutes before I decided, let me get inside and, work with my family and figure out what's happening. But that was my aha moment, that our well-being in this work is very important. A lot of people didn't figure that out until about 6 years later when the pandemic hit. And we learned very quickly that there's a thin line between the folks that we serve and ourselves. And now we're dealing with the ripple effect of that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go. Whoops. Uh-oh. Go back. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to shift lenses. I like to see myself as a disruptor of thought because we can get very stuck in our thought patterns and our worldviews. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So some of the information I'm going to share with you, it's not going to be new. It may just be a reframe of something that you've heard. But I'm going to provide some context. And that's how I like to do this, to get us to go, how do I apply that in the work that I do? How do I see that from a different angle? How do I put this in practice, not just professionally, but also personally as well? And I like to start with worldview. Now, worldview typically is something that we hear about. I think my slides are on a timer. All right. So worldview is typically something that we think about. And if you ever Google worldview, you'll find it from more of a religious standpoint. That's not necessarily the standpoint that I'm taking today. I'm taking more of a general standpoint towards worldview, but it is a very important concept that I think when we talk about being trauma informed and what does that mean? Worldview is a particular philosophy of life or conception of the world. And we all bring our worldviews with us all the time. Many of you have brought your worldviews with you today. Many of you have, your worldviews are influencing how you even understand trauma-informed care, or ACEs. When we talk about ACEs, a lot of those ACEs are played out, like the responses to them, I should say, due to our worldviews. I grew up right down the road from here. I'm a product of Rondo. And I know my worldview is very different than someone who grew up in Edina. And I know that my parents and my grandparents' worldview is very different than someone who grew up in Woodbury. And that's okay. Doesn't mean it was better or different or wrong, but it was just a different approach due to worldview. And it's important for us to understand that because we're bringing this when we're looking at solving problems and dealing with issues. So let's talk about how that's developed. Worldviews are dynamic. I like to think of worldview as an addition equation. So you have your influences plus your experiences equal your worldview. What are our influences? Typically, those are the experiences we have when we're very young. It doesn't stop there, it continues, but when we're very young. Our primary influencers, biological parents, caregivers, siblings. As we get a little older, it starts to transition to professionals like ourselves, educators, teachers, sometimes spiritual leaders, community members. And then as we get a little bit older, it becomes our social groups, our friends, things of that nature. People always want Brandon for something. That's what I'll tell you. Sorry about that. And then as we continue to move forward, we get influenced by additional things, media, right? Many of us are bombarded by media all the time. And it's impacting our worldview and it's shifting our understanding of how do we see the world around us. Then you add that to experiences. Your experiences are the environments that you find yourselves in. That's a big piece about things like ACEs, environments. And the situations you find yourself in. And when you add those two things together, it starts to shape what we call worldview. Now, with worldview, it's not just, isolated. It's not by itself. It's wrapped around values. And our values are developed throughout this time as well. Sometimes those values shift and they shape as we go. And then around that is behaviors, how we act out and play out these things. And then around that is culture, or cultures if we want to dissect a little further. Now, when we say culture, especially in our Western paradigm, our brains go to race and ethnicity first. Anybody do that? Be honest. It's okay. It's how we were socialized. It's not your fault. All right. But everybody around the world doesn't go there first. It's just us. It's us. But culture is more dynamic than just race and ethnicity. Very important. I'm not saying throw it away. But I am saying that there's other factors at play when it comes to culture. And we can't lose sight of that when we talk about being trauma-informed, because you can't have trauma-informed care without having what I call cultural intelligence, because our worldviews are different from each other. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Here's my quick and easy definition of trauma. A deep emotional wound. A deep emotional wound. Now I teach, there's other people who instruct, I talked to one earlier. There's a bunch of big fancy academic definitions for trauma. This is a good one. This is one that I used to utilize with a lot of my clients. A deep emotional wound. It makes it subjective. Because I remember having clients, young people, come in my office and talk about things. I remember when Philando Castile was shot. Went to St. Paul Central. We actually went to Central together, believe it or not. I remember seeing that video almost when it was live. Back then, that's when Facebook Lives and all that had just started. People probably don't remember. It just started. The video ended and people were going crazy on my Facebook because we're all connected. And boom, I'm like, what is this? And I remember I couldn't sleep. It was during the summertime. I was doing therapy at what used to be Henry High School, now Camden High School. And I must be a good therapist because I had 4 black males who showed up in the summer to see Brandon for therapy the next day. That's hard to do if you don't know. That's very hard to do. And these are young people too. They were all like under 17. And I remember going into session with these young people and I'm saying, did y'all see the video? By then the video was viral. I mean, that was probably one of the bigger viral things that we had at the time. And I think 3 out of the 4 said, yeah, I seen the video. And I said, how are you feeling? Because I'll be honest, I probably shouldn't have went to work that day, to be honest with you, because I was not in the right headspace. How are you feeling? And one young man's response to me stands out to this day. Now, talk about being trauma-informed, I was not ready for this. He said, Brandon, people get shot every day. It's nothing. It's nothing. That just hit me. I was like, whoa. Now, I was able to pull it together, transition into session, end our session together, but that stuck with me, that was normalized for him to kind of process that type of environment. And this was like I think he was about 14, 15 years old. But he's been seeing it for so long. The violence, the adversity, the trauma, that was normalized for him at that age. And I know we're talking about younger children, but they're seeing it too. They're seeing it too. And that's when I realized this trauma thing, for me, is very subjective because it can be normalized for somebody at that age. It can probably be normalized for somebody even younger and how that they respond to it. So I often say that trauma is closely connected to toxic stress and toxic stress environments. This is where a lot of the work needs to be done. How do we start to shift the places and spaces that people are in so they're not always responding with hypervigilance? They're not always responding with fear or paranoia. And how do we start to break some of the ice of the differences that we see amongst folks when they are in fear of things like professionals and things of that nature? So how does trauma make an impact? Well, individuals who survive trauma vary widely in how they experience and express traumatic experience reactions. Traumatic stress reactions vary in severity. They're often measured by the levels of impairment or distress that clients report and are determined by the multiple factors and characteristics of trauma itself, individual history and characteristics, developmental factors, social, cultural attributes, and available resources. So the response is varied. It's not just one response. How does trauma impact individuals' worldview, the folks that we work with, the families, the clients, the participants? So the characteristics of trauma and the subsequent traumatic stress reactions can dramatically influence how individuals respond to the environment, relationships, interventions, treatment services, and those characteristics can also shape the assumptions that individuals make about their world, right? They start to view other people, who's safe and who isn't safe. Now, the work that we do at MACMA, a lot of our work surrounds very young people, people under the age of 8 years old. They're already responding in this way. Who's safe, who isn't safe? What to tell, what not to tell. who to talk to, who not to talk to, how to protect myself. Think about that. We have second graders thinking about how to protect themselves from the moment they get up to the moment that they go to bed. The future, right? Hopelessness, fear, foresight of the future. Just thinking of what happens. We have a lot of folks who are living moment to moment, not even day by day, literally moment to moment. That's what trauma does. Put you in a time capsule, and your survival mode is moment. It's literally by the moment, and it impacts their view of themselves, how much they do feel resilient, feelings of incompetence, and even their ability to regulate their own emotions. These are all the things that we're working towards and working on. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, a trauma-informed care approach is not accomplished through any single particular technique or checklist. It requires consistent attention, caring awareness, sensitivity, and the possibility of culture change at an organizational or system-wide level. It's not just individuals, it's all of us doing this work. And I would even say it expands beyond just the program that an individual is working with or the group. It's all of us working together in events like this that bring us together, where we can connect, build networks, and approach these issues from a collaborative standpoint. So what is the research telling us? Well, trauma widespread impact. So there's studies that continue to underscore the prevalence of trauma. Approximately 61% of adults report experiencing at least one ACE during childhood. Trauma disproportionately affects children from marginalized communities, and it affects a lot of children. It exacerbates the developmental disparities as well. So we know that trauma is still having a major impact. When it comes to worldview and CQ, which is cultural intelligence, I talk a lot about cultural intelligence in the research. There's emerging research that's highlighting worldview and cultural intelligence influence in trauma recovery. There's neurobiological studies that are revealing that cultural congruence interventions reduce stress and promote resiliency. When we are building programs, it's very important that we're thinking about how is culture playing a role in our program development. And what populations are we working with? There's not a one-size-all-fit model. When we talk about best practices, it's really hard when you have like 3 different community groups that you're working with, because you have to start to bend and flex. Adaptability is going to be our strength moving forward. The pandemic has proven that. Adaptability for the folks who do the work, and adaptability on how we do the work. We're going to have to bend and flex ourselves as much as possible, and that's okay, because we're going to have to get real creative to solve a lot of the issues that we have today. A lot of creativity. Psychological research emphasizes the role in identity and belonging in healing from trauma, right? So it's getting back to that who am I question, right? In the ACEs work, we've heard a lot about, it's not about what happened to you. It's more about what happened to you than who did it. But for example, there's culture-specific rituals and practices such as storytelling in indigenous communities or spiritual guidance in faith-based communities provide pathways for emotional regulation and recovery, leaning into those cultural assets that we do have, or helping build new traditions and rituals for folks as well. But there's opportunities for us to lean into this. And part of that work, again, is utilizing something called cultural intelligence. Some of you may be familiar with the awareness to action framework. I'm going to talk a little bit about it here, but it consists of 3 essential steps. The first is awareness, recognizing the presence and impact of trauma, identifying the effects of adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, the systematic inequities on children's development, educating communities about the neurological, emotional, and social ramifications of trauma. Now, the interesting thing about the educating the community piece is folks are living this. So sometimes you're just connecting a dot or giving it a label so people can recognize what they've been feeling for most of their life. That's the aha moment. It doesn't have to be super scientific. It doesn't have to be something where you're talking over folks' heads. It's really just that aha moment that, hey, that stuff you're dealing with, what you're feeling, this is what it's called. And it comes from somewhere, and it's not your fault. And you can do something about it. A little bit of that, sometimes that's all people need to know to just make that difference and push towards healing. Push towards healing. Action. So the implementing responsive strategies, creating policies and environments that emphasize safety, trust, and collaboration. This takes work and intentionality. Consistency, showing up, listening, community collaboration is a big part of some of this work. And sometimes that's hard because there's a lot of communities that don't trust. Believe it or not, no matter how nice our programs are, how awesome our staff are, people still see us as a system. And we have to understand that. And guess what? That's okay. Because at some point, you build that trust, that authentic rapport, they'll still see you as a system. Don't get it wrong. But they'll be a little bit more willing to work with you because you're being consistent. You're being authentic. Sometimes you're even being transparent, and people will trust you enough to move forward. So again, ensuring that caregivers, educators, and professionals are equipped to support children and families. And then the third one is sustainability. And this is the one we struggle with because a lot of us are funding dependent. That's true. But we have to figure out, how do we make this sustainable? How do we help build this into well-being practices for communities, parents, caregivers, and even children themselves? Is there something over time that as we continue to move forward, they can take with them beyond this program or service that we're delivering? How do we make this sustainable? Sometimes it's even just changing language and frameworks for people to understand how to approach things differently. So embedding trauma-informed practices into systems, ensuring long-term commitment through training, policy updates, and leadership buy-in are all very important. And then regular evaluation of practice to meet the evolving community and cultural needs. Again, there's no one solution, but there is opportunity here that we have. And then the role that worldview plays in trauma-informed care. So again, worldview are our deeply held beliefs shaped by culture, sometimes religion, and lived experiences greatly impacts how we perceive and address trauma. Trauma-informed care systems understand worldview is critical for two major reasons. The first, trauma perception and culturally influence. Different communities interpret and respond to trauma in varied ways, and those varied ways can look like this. There are Western frameworks, often prioritizing psychological definitions of trauma. Now, I didn't give you a psychological definition of trauma, right? I said it's a deep emotional wound. And I said, that worked very well for a lot of my clients because they perceive their trauma very differently, right? Or I can give them the big fancy definition and they're like, what? Like, what are you talking about, Brandon? You're too nerdy, man. Like, they're just stuff like that, right? So sometimes we just have to remix what we're trying to say for folks to understand it or put it in terms that they get. And it means the same thing, but they just interpret it from their worldview. Indigenous and collectivist cultures may view trauma as disproportionate of communal harmony or spiritual balance, right? And then failing to consider these perspectives can lead to misdiagnosis and inadequate interventions. I think we have enough research and data to help us understand that. But for example, behavior interpretation as oppositional in one culture might reflect cultural norms of independence and resistance to oppression in another. See a lot of that. See a lot over my career as a clinician. Most of my clients are African American males. A lot of oppositional defiance disorder. A lot of EBD. Now, some of it justified. I'm not gonna sit here and lie to you. I'm like, yep, that's pretty much classic case right there. But there were some environmental factors. There were some other things at play. And when you're able to work and build treatment and treatment plans and things that help to kind of adjust some of that aggression or give opportunities on different activities, sometimes those things can be curved, right? All right, continued. Building trust through cultural alignment. So worldviews also shape how caregivers and professionals build trust with children and families. Trauma-informed systems must align with community values to be effective. Now, this part is where it gets a little tricky because, again, as I stated, it may be more than one community. So sometimes you have to find what are the commonalities and then what are those unique factors that speak to the communities that you serve. Sometimes when we're building programs, it doesn't have to be for everybody. It may just be for the folks who are coming through the door. And that's okay. And that's okay. As long as you are finding that it's effective, that's what's most important. And then this alignment fosters trust, enabling children to feel understood and supported. Now, using cultural intelligence as a tool for action, and I'm getting ready to close out here pretty soon. Cultural intelligence refers to the ability to effectively engage with individuals from diverse cultural backgrounds, and then the awareness to action framework. Cultural intelligence is dispensable for several reasons, and I'm just going to go through a few of them here. So addressing the systematic inadequacies. So research shows that marginalized communities face higher rates of ACEs due to systematic inequities such as poverty, racism, and and limited access to healthcare. High cultural intelligence equips professionals or folks like us to recognize and mitigate biases, advocate for culturally relevant resources, also helps us to enhance our developmental outcomes. So children thrive when their cultural identities are acknowledged and celebrated. High cultural intelligence interventions validate children's cultural heritage and boost their self-esteem, and then create environments where children feel seen and valued. And number 3, improving our professional competence. So caregivers, professionals with high cultural intelligence are better equipped to navigate culture across interactions, ensuring trauma-informed care, and then respects and incorporates cultural nuances. You don't have to be an expert in culture or in a specific culture to do this. There is an actual framework to cultural intelligence that helps you put it into action. But it's the attempt and it's the authenticity that's important. It's making sure that you're trying, that you're listening, and that you're engaging to the best of your ability. That's how we have to make a difference. We're going to have to push. We're all becoming more and more connected every day. Working on our biases, working on our understanding and our competencies is going to be one of the biggest opportunities for us to make the difference that we say that we want to make. So the pathway moving forward and making the commitment. Resilience. Resilience is the capacity of a dynamic system to adapt successfully to challenges that threaten the function, survival, and future development of the system. So Ann Madsen, professor at the University of Minnesota. That's how we define community resilience. The ability of community systems to prepare for, withstand, and recover from acute shocks while also addressing and preventing the adverse effects of structural racism and other inequities, I should say, as well. And then number 2, a community's ability to cope, strive, and support through equitable access to buffers that address and relieve sources of chronic stress and acute adversity. I think number 2 is where a lot of us are really diving in, but we need both. We need both. So where to now? The Awareness to Action Framework is one opportunity. The Awareness to Action Framework provides a roadmap to integrate trauma-informed care into systems and that support children. However, its effectiveness depends on addressing the critical elements of worldview and cultural intelligence. Also, by embedding these perspectives into every level of care, we're not only enhancing the developmental outcomes for children, but we're also building equitable and inclusive environments while all children can thrive. Now, the challenge is where we kind of get caught up, but again, there's opportunity in the challenge. The challenge is clear, but the opportunity is greater. For the Awareness to Action framework, we can create systems that honor resiliency from every child while respecting their culture that shapes them. So take action today. So whether you're a caregiver, educator, or advocate committing to learning about the intersections of trauma, worldview, and cultural intelligence together can help build a brighter future for all the children that we work with. Children are changing. Youth culture changes like every 4 years. I don't know if you have young ones like under 12 years old at your house. I don't know what my kids are talking about. Skibbity boo bop. They're saying all types of stuff. And I'm like, what is going on? I look at my daughter's text messages. I don't know half the stuff her and her friends are talking about. Youth culture, we have to pay attention to youth culture. We have to pay attention to how racism, sexism, all the isms are showing up. It's a lot of work. It can be overwhelming, I get it. But if we stop paying attention to it, we may end up doing more harm than we think we're trying to solve because we don't have our eye on the ball and focusing on what's going on. So I want to encourage you all, keep doing the work that you're doing, but don't close your eyes. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. That was an amazing presentation. I know I'll be taking away that challenge you all just took to us, utilizing that action to awareness framework. And I want to highlight two things that Brandon said. One, I think using that simple definition of what trauma is, right? I think is going to be really powerful for us. The other thing I heard really was about the need for us to be adaptable and flexible as we think about this. So I'm just going to extend that challenge to all of you as we think about how we move forward in this work. So thank you again, Brandon. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Angie Clair, the dedicated director here at the Wilder Child Development Center. Angie brings her own remarkable commitment to creating supportive, trauma-informed environments where every child can thrive. Her leadership exemplifies the very principles Brandon has so eloquently described, transforming awareness into tangible supports for our community's most vulnerable children. Welcome, Angie.
Good morning. I'm Angie Clair, and thank you for that nice introduction. I am really excited about the things that Brandon just shared because they echo everything that I will be talking about in my presentation as well. Today, what I would like to do is I would like to take you on a journey with me about these different areas that, again, Brandon looked at too. So we're going to look at one of our kids, Justice, and his mom, Chandra. We're going to have a little mini story about this family and how some of these things that we just heard about, how they can be done in a supportive environment for children to help them do well. So Justice came to us with his mom at about 2.5 years old. He was a very curious little guy and came into the center just super excited to look at everything. You know that toddler wide-eyed look where everything is open and everything they just want to touch? That was Justice when he came in with his mom. And when I walked around the building with her to do the tour with Chandra, she was really excited to see the opportunities that her son could have while he was at the center. We got about halfway through the tour and she said, you know, I'm really nervous and really worried about having Justice in care. So, well, tell me more. What are you worried and concerned about? Through COVID, he had been home with mom, never been in childcare before, and mom was his only provider. So she was really concerned about him being with other people that she didn't know, didn't trust, and was also concerned about how he would feel to not be with her. So what we're going to do is we're going to look through these different areas and see how we helped support Justice and Chandra. First thing is that, you know, having that trauma or that supportive environment is so important. We know for children that the environment is one of the spaces that they spend most of their days, right? The classroom is, they spend sometimes as much time there as they do at home, if not more. And they need to have a safe space. That safe space is not just a space where they're not going to get hurt. It's a safe space where they know they belong, that someone's there that cares about them, that wants to listen to them, and wants to engage them in learning. The safe space also allows for children to explore and make mistakes. That's right, I said mistakes, right? Because in early childhood, we're all about trying and exploring and then learning from what you try. And if you're able to make a mistake in a supportive environment, you're going to learn from it and not feel ashamed or discouraged to try again. For Justice, this meant that he needed to have a teacher that was aware of what was going on with him through the day, right? Someone that would look and say, okay, he's getting ready to get upset because I can see his face. He can't get his shoe on. He's getting upset. Let me go help support. Let me have a conversation. The other thing that we did for a supportive environment was that the teacher learned very quickly that drop-off time was really difficult. And we knew that that was going to be the case with mom sharing that information, saying, I'm concerned about leaving him in a place he's never been. So his first couple days were really rough for drop-off. They were really rough for mom, and we wanted to find a way that we could support them in the classroom. Amazing toddler teacher learned very quickly that Justice had a favorite toy in the classroom, and it was cars, Hot Wheel cars. You name it, he liked it. Hot Wheel cars were his thing. So the teacher said, okay, I'm going to adapt this drop off because I want him to feel safe and comfortable and also happy to come to school every day. So he got to come in the classroom and pick the car that he got to drive for the day. That was so important for him, and it helped him leave from mom knowing that he's in a safe place and he can choose how he wants to enter the classroom. Choice is really important for our kids as well. So we also had to work on this with mom because mom sees that now her little boy can leave without her, and she's feeling like, I'm kind of sad. He can go on without me. But mom, we worked on a routine with mom as well, so she knows that, before she leaves, she could give him a hug, she could give him a kiss, and she could watch him through the window of the classroom door to see him go and thrive in his classroom and feel special with his team. I think the other piece to this is that we described this, this routine and how it worked, but to know that it doesn't always work. So I can tell you this beautiful story of every day he came in, he was so happy, he got his car and he was off to start his day. Not always the case. Brendan said this too, that, we have to be flexible and adaptable. Some days this is going to work and some days it's not. So a few weeks into Justice being in our care, mom shared with us she was starting to build a relationship and was starting to share more things about her concerns and where she was at. And she shared with us that Justice, his father had passed when he was 1.5 years old. And there were some feelings with mom around being an only parent, having to parent without the father, and also starting to see behaviors at home that she just didn't understand and didn't know what to do with. Now, toddlers show behaviors. They have tantrums. They have times where they cry and you just don't know what they're crying about, right? But for mom, she knew that something was not quite right and wanted to know what she could do. Self-regulation is something that, we work with children to give them skills, to help them get from their emotional part of their brain to their thinking part of their brain. Because if you are so emotional, you can't move into the thinking part, and it's hard to problem solve. It's hard to come up with ideas of what you can do differently, let alone do it when you're 2.5, right? They're still trying to figure out if they want to eat breakfast or not. So we looked at what we could do for Justice with some self-regulation. We incorporated sensory activities such as Play-Doh, fidget toys. We had a sensory backpack in the classroom full of lots of toys that Justice could use at any time. Not just Justice, but any kid in the classroom. But Justice really liked that bag. Maybe one day it was smashing the squishy ball into the table because that's what he was feeling that day, or it was just rubbing the bumpy texture on one of the rings. It was very helpful in helping him to calm and relax himself. The other thing is that the teacher then would also notice when he was showing positive behaviors in the classroom. When he was playing with a toy and he was really happy, the teacher would make notice of that. Justice, you must be happy. I see a smile on your face, and would bring a mini mirror over to show his face so he could see. Look at your face. You're showing a smile. What's making you happy? Justice also had a family picture that his family brought in, that mom brought in, of mom and dad and Justice. That picture was laminated so that he could take that around the room whenever he needed it. And for the first few weeks, he needed that. He needed it. It's not as important now, but he needed it then. Positive reinforcement, I think this, a lot of these kind of go hand in hand. But for Justice, this positive reinforcement was giving reminders when changes were about to happen. We're about to clean up and we're going to go visit the library. Do you want to hold my hand while we walk there? So that he knew someone was there to help support him if he needed it. We also used this strategy that I like to call positive opposites, where we're telling children what we want to see from them as opposed to what we don't want to see. This worked really well with Justice. Instead of saying, don't climb on that chair, saying, oh, our feet go on the floor. So much more beneficial for the children to hear the words of what you're wanting to see. And this worked really well for him. This also goes into adapting those teaching strategies. I feel like this topic is pretty much everything that we're talking about. You're adapting the way that you're supporting the children. Individualized support for early childhood, this isn't new, right? We've heard about children need things that are, individually important for them and help them, thrive. But when we're using a trauma-informed strategy, you have to adapt it a little differently. This means kind of shifting your thinking, that adaptable and flexible thinking of why are we seeing the behaviors that we're seeing. It's not just because Justice wanted to be a naughty 2.5-year-old, right? When mom's work shift changed and she's working overnights and he's not seeing mom, he's coming in the next day and he's really struggling and needing more hugs and support from his teachers. But if you don't dig in to look at what the behavior is telling you, you would assume Justice might need a referral. He's got some behaviors. Or like you were saying, looking at these oppositional defiant disorders, like what do we have? What's going on with him? That's not the case. He just needed some extra support. So that's where the collaboration with families and communities comes in. We are lucky enough at our center that we partner with the mental health clinic here at Wilder, so we do have a therapist that helps support our families. Justice was referred to see the therapist due to the fact that mom was seeing some behaviors at home, but also so that we could look at some coping skills for him for the loss of his father. He was seen for a few sessions. We recommended him to be a part of our social skills group, which I'll explain in just a second. And mom also had some sessions with the therapist as well. The thing about, I forgot to mention this, but the thing about ACEs and knowing about where our families come from, we are not very lucky to know you've had this happen and you've had this happen and oh my gosh, you're gonna need this support. We don't get that in our early childhood program. Where do we find out that information? It's from building those relationships with parents and having conversations and being in a supportive environment to show them we're here for you and we're not just here to take care of your child, we're here to support you and your family. All around support. So this picture here, I like that it shows the 3 different pieces, but I have this visual of this. Right? So you have all of the supports and you have the family and the children in the middle. So the other thing with Chandra was that she was also starting to find her voice and be very vocal in the things that she needed as a parent. She said, I'm struggling with this. I don't know how to talk to my son about the fact that his father has passed. I need some support with this. And she said, it'd be really great if we had some books or resources for parents in a lending library. Okay, it's a great idea. We worked out how to find some resources to do this, and we got some various topics of parenting books to put in our parent space at the center. She was so excited when those books came in, was one of the first parents to check out books. Professional development is a big piece to this. Through the last 2.5 years, we have done a lot of training. We've learned a lot of different things, and many of the partners in this, support from Greater Twin Cities United Way, 80 by 3 cohort. I'm telling you, if we were not a part of that cohort, this change would not have happened. And I'm not saying that because Jamie's looking at me. I'm so serious. We knew that kids needed more coming out of COVID. In the middle of COVID, we knew something needed to change. We just didn't know what that thing was. And 80 by 3 brought that to us, to know this is what we need to do differently. Our staff did trainings through Think Small Institute, through the Center for Inclusive Childcare, and MACMA. So we've done many different trainings with different institutions and partners to get this training for families, or for staff, excuse me. One of the biggest takeaways from this professional development is that trauma's heavy. Trauma is heavy for our families, it's heavy for our kids, but guess what? We all have our own trauma too. We all have our own things inside ourselves that can start to come out when you start talking about these things and training about these things, especially with other adults. So you have to have space and the environment to be open and have conversations with your team when these things are coming up. We can't expect early childhood teachers, well, we expect them to be everything. We can't expect them to do all these amazing things when there's some things going on with themselves that they need to also work through. One of the other things with the professional development and with our team that we also recognize through this is that our staff need to reflect the kids that we serve and families that we serve. You cannot have this supportive environment if you do not have people in the space that look like the children that you're working with. You can't. The other thing that we did with professional development is we shared time at each of our staff meetings to talk about this work. And if there were questions, if there were things that we needed to talk about, like I'm dealing with this with a family. This is really difficult. And we would problem solve and talk through. We also held a healing circle with Creative Caponia with our team to really work through what we've all learned about trauma and stress and how that affects us. It's very helpful. And this last slide here is about monitoring success and continuous improvement. This is where we are at right now. This is where we're at right now. We are looking at what we have done in the last 2.5 years, what has worked, what needs to be adapted, and what can we do in the future. The thing with this work, and I think you said this very well, like it continues to change. Trauma's there, but the way that we interact with it, the way that we can be supportive is going to change because every person is different. Every family has a different situation, and it's going to continue to change. As far as Justice goes, he joined our social skills group, which is a group of children that have been identified as maybe needing some extra support outside of the classroom. These are not children with any diagnoses of any kind. These are children that we've noticed maybe they just need help doing some sharing interactions with 3 children instead of a group of 10, right? So he's been a part of this social skills group for 8 weeks. 8 weeks. He's using his words. He's talking to his peers. The cars are not even really a thing. And we lost a lot of Hot Wheels, by the way. It's okay, it's totally fine. But he's thriving, he's not where he needs to be, but he's moving. He's moving in the direction that we can see. He's using his impulse control. When he's frustrated and upset, he can say, "I'm mad," instead of hitting the child next to him. He's also working on problem solving. And the biggest thing is he's made friendships with the peers in the classroom. He has a support system now of a couple other kids in that classroom for him to be excited to see during the day. I hope Justice and Shonda's story helps you visualize the support and care that can happen. There's so many more details that could be shared about this. I could talk about this probably all morning. But I just really thought that his story and Shonda's story would help show the practical pieces of how this can happen in a classroom setting. Thank you for listening, and I hope I created a few connections for you.
Thank you so much, Angie. For me, it's the stories that make these things real. It's the things that we take away. And the connection between Brandon, as we talk about the research and the best practices and the definitions, to then put that in context with justice and what that looks like in a classroom, in a setting, in community is just so vitally important. And it's the things that we walk away from. So thank you so much for sharing your story, Angie. Now I'm pleased to introduce our final speaker. Josh Crosson is the Executive Director of EdAllies. Josh brings a wealth of experience in education policy and advocacy to our discussion. And I'm just going to emphasize the power of stories at the legislature is so very, very, very important. At EdAllies, he leads efforts to ensure all Minnesota students, especially those most underserved, have access to a great education. Josh will share his insights on how we can promote trauma-informed care through public policy, bridging the gap between awareness and action at a systems level. Please welcome Josh. Oops, I went the wrong way.
All right. Thank you, Cisa. Hi, all. Good morning. I am Josh Crosson. I use he or they pronouns. Happy to talk a little bit about kind of bird's eye view of what's going on in early learning, trauma-informed care and practices, and also talk a little bit about dismissals, unfair dismissal practices throughout this conversation. But who are we at EdAllies? So EdAllies, we are an organization that's dedicated to making sure that each and every kid throughout the state of Minnesota has access to an excellent education from early learning to college and career. And how oftentimes people say, well, how can we get kids ready for college? How can we make sure that they're ready for their careers? And I say, well, they need to graduate high school first. But before they graduate high school, we need to make sure that they're ready, they're prepared at 9th grade. 9th grade is the biggest indicator to making sure that kids are graduating high school. Before they graduate 9th grade, they have to have a good foundation in middle school. But before they have a good foundation in middle school, they have to be able to read by 3rd grade. Before they read by 3rd grade, they have to have a good foundation in 1st grade and 2nd grade and have a good experience in kindergarten. And before they get to kindergarten, they have to have a good foundation in early learning, high quality early learning. And before they get to high quality early learning, they have to have pretty good prenatal care, right? So it is a continuum. You can't just say, we got to do this in order to do this. And to think about a system for the student just as much as the system of education in Minnesota more generally. Sorry, I got really excited there for a second. But at EdAllies, we're really known for our policy work, but we can't just do policy in a vacuum. We can't just go to the Capitol and say, hey, we should just do that. We have to listen to the community and making sure that our communities, our parents, our students, our educators are leading the conversation about what needs to change in our system. So community action and organizing is important. Then we also need to do the research. What's going on in the little corners of Minnesota that's working really well? What's going on throughout the country or in other countries that we can bring to Minnesota? And how can we right-size that so it's happening, those good things are happening for everybody? Then we do the policy change, right? We do the research, we understand what's going on, we understand the problems, we understand the solutions. Now let's push the solutions forward in policy. And policy is just one part, one tiny moment. I call, there's a running joke at the Capitol, MS stands for Minnesota statute, but it should stand for mere suggestion, because the number of policies that are in books that aren't actually implemented, so implementation is the other 99.99% of the work. All right, so now let's get into it. So is equity the new cryptocurrency? That is, we're talking a lot about it, but are we really spending it? Are we really doing it? What is equity? Well, a lot of times when I ask that question, what is equity, people think about those kids watching the baseball game on the boxes. I hate that image. It's like, why aren't they just in the stands? So, right, so we have inequality. We have a system that provides more for some kids and less for other kids, right? The tree is bent in a way where one kid gets the apples and the other kid doesn't. We have equality, where we're providing resources, equal amount of resources, and again, one kid gets the apples, the other kid doesn't. Then we have equity, and I'm going to challenge us for a little bit. Equity is not our goal. Equity is a strategy to the goal, right? We're providing the resources to the kids so each kid gets the apples, but why is the tree bent like that in the first place, right? Justice is our goal. So equity is our strategy towards a just system. Let's fix the tree so that all kids can have access to the apples in perpetuity, right? And oftentimes when we're talking about trauma-informed care and practices, we stop at the equity part. We stop at how can we provide the resources to kids, but we're not asking the question, the second part of equity is how did we get here in the first place, and how can we fix that system? So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to fix the system in an equitable way. All right, first point of conversation is we got to provide access to high quality early learning. And really the goal here is for every kid, early learning on, is to access an education that meets their cultural, academic, social, emotional needs. I'll also add cognitive development. And that includes affordability. We are facing a fiscal cliff in early learning scholarships. I started this job, I was talking to Frank over here, who was a founding board member of our organization. First met Frank 12 years ago starting this job, and we started with high quality early learning scholarships, right? The Parent Aware program, I was joining the Mini Minds Coalition, it was amazing. And we are seeing a 50% cut in the next year and a half. Early learning scholarships provide access through affordability to high quality education, social emotional needs and intelligence and cultural awareness for students. We heard Cisa's statistics on that. So why would we cut the program by 50%? That's one area where we need to address in the upcoming legislative sessions. Roadmap, we have the Parent Aware Racial Equity Action Plan, which is amazing. I will admit I read the Cliff Notes version before this presentation, but read the full report yesterday, and it's amazing. Like we're ready to implement that, and I think EdAllies is excited too. And then the providers, right? many people in this room, we need to support our early learning providers with the tools necessary to implement trauma-informed practices and also not advance harm. And then lastly, perspective. We just heard the amazing story of justice. We need more justices. I wish I was a justice in my early learning program. I remember crying at the window every single morning my mom dropped me off, and I didn't have the Hot Wheels techniques. But that's normal childhood development. And oftentimes normal childhood development, especially for Black and brown students, especially for students with disabilities, is criminalized. It's how can we push this kid through a behavioral program that then can get him an IEP when he gets to K-12? We got to see them as normal childhood experiences and address them as normal childhood experiences. So that's a little bit about high quality early learning that we will likely be introducing at the Capitol. And to kind of sum it up in a nice little bow, what we often say in our office is like, how can we create legislation to make sure that people stop acting like jerks to kids? If anyone has that bill, come talk to me. I'd love to write it. Okay, and the second part is unfair discipline for early learners. And we know that, I will actually first say, we are part of the Solutions Not Suspensions Coalition, which is an organization that rallies educators, families, students around replacing unfair discipline practices with practices that are culturally aware, social and emotionally developed. Discipline, the root of discipline, disciple, right? Follow, lead, teach. Discipline should be a teaching practice, not a way to push kids out of their education. So pop quiz. This is the best way I learned, was through kind of like, oh crap, I didn't study. So first question, we have 33% of our students in the state of Minnesota are kids of color, Indigenous students. What percent of suspensions and expulsions are kids of color or Indigenous students? A, 37%, B, 57%, C, 67%, or D, 87%. I'm hearing a lot of sibilant C's. Who thinks it's 37%, about equal the proportion? B, 57%, a little bit more than half. All right, C, 67%. D, 87%, nearly all. Oh, we got a lot of pessimists in the room. It is C, 67%. But the vast majority are for Black students and for Native American students. I always think about this as about 1 in 3 of our kids are Indigenous or kids of color. 2/3 are white. You flip that, that's our suspension and expulsion rate. 2/3 are kids of color and Indigenous, and 1/3 are white. And the vast majority, again, or the vast plurality are Black students in this instance, right? Which happens, again, when we push kids out of school. They're less likely to be able to read and do math, and math proficiency. It's no surprise that math proficiency is going down, as we see for students of color and for kids with disabilities. And as our state diversifies and we're pushing more kids of color and kids with disabilities out of school, what you're seeing here is the blue bar are white students, the yellow bar is kids of color. We're getting more and more diverse every single year. And as we're pushing more kids of color out of school, we are now below the national average in 4th grade reading for the first time we've ever kept track of this information. So as we're getting more and more diverse, we're not creating a system that meets the needs for kids of color and kids with disabilities, resulting in all of our boats sinking, right? The pollution doesn't just stay over, quote, the bad neighborhood. It's going everywhere. So as a state, we need to serve every kid. All right, second question. About 13% of students have a disability. What percent of all Minnesota dismissals are among students with disabilities? A, nearly a quarter, B, nearly half, C, nearly all, or D, none. The federal government protects kids with disabilities. I love that. All right, A, quarter, B, half, C, nearly all, D, the federal government protects. By the laughter, I feel like nearly half, right? So 15% of our kids take up 50% of suspensions and expulsions. And the vast plurality of those are the disruptive disorderly conduct, the emotional behavioral disorder conducts, right? These are not the violent actions, these are not the fighting, the carrying a weapon, the having the drugs. It's emotional behavioral issues, right? So next question, nationwide, now we're comparing Minnesota to the rest of the nation. Black students are 3.5 times more likely than white students nationwide to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts. And the Native American students are 5 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than white students nationwide. What does that look like in Minnesota compared to the nation? Do we have less disparity than the nation, A? Do we have the same disparity as the nation, B? Do we have slightly more disparity than national averages, C? Or do we have more than double national averages, D? C? Slightly more than average? It is D. We are double the national averages in disparity, right? So where we are 3.5 times, Black students are 3.5 more times likely nationwide to be suspended and expelled. It's about 8 times more likely in Minnesota. And for Native American students, it's 10 times more likely, where it's 5 times more likely nationwide, right? So we are doing a particularly good job of pushing kids of color out of classrooms compared to the rest of the nation. And lastly, hitting it home, you know, if you don't know the answer to this, then you don't know where this is think small, right? Pre-K, 3 and 4-year-olds are more likely to be expelled than any other student group. So the conservative estimates are 3 times more likely, but we've seen estimates at 15, 17 times more likely depending on the reporting. So when we're talking about suspending and expelling kids, we're talking about our 3 and 4-year-olds. We're talking about the kids that were here, showing up here today. And then lastly, which is true, the experiences of suspension and expulsion are stressful and negative experiences, ACEs in other words, that can influence adverse outcomes across later childhood development. B, young children who are expelled or suspended are as much as 10 times more likely to drop out of high school. C, dismissed students are nearly 3 times more likely to be involved with the juvenile justice system. Or D, all of the above. All of the above, right? So the things that we are doing for our 3 and 4-year-olds right now are not doing result in long-term impacts. I usually start that question with this pop quiz with who has been suspended in this room or expelled in this room. I raise my hand, and a lot of people of color in the room raise their hand. I'm not going to ask you at all, be courageous, but it's real. It shows up in our own lives, and it's showing up in our kids' lives right now. So before I end, I want to talk a little bit about the policies and opportunities going on at the Capitol this upcoming session. We all know the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act is what guides suspensions and expulsions and fairness practices in Minnesota. Since we created the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act in 1974, we have since scaled that policy back to give fewer and fewer rights to families, to students. So it does create due process, but for expulsions only. It requires a willful act to be suspension or expulsion. So there's still some guidelines, but since 1974, we've definitely scaled that back. There are a lot of things that the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act don't do, like provide opportunities for teachers to intervene or create engagement plans for students once they come back from a suspension or expulsion. So a few positive changes that happened at the Capitol these last couple years. First, we created a pre-K through 3rd grade suspension ban. So our youngest learners can no longer be suspended in Minnesota's public schools in Minnesota, which is great. We put a ban on holds, so school staff can't place children in dangerous holds unless that child is a threat. We have a pre-K through 3rd grade seclusion ban. And I want to talk a little bit more about seclusions before closing out here. But that just means schools can't lock students in rooms without an adult. And this is huge for pre-K through 3rd grade because it's happening to young kids. Teachers aren't putting their hands on 16-year-olds, right? They can do it for 6-year-olds, but not 16-year-olds. So pre-K through 3rd grade seclusion ban and then lastly, defending play. So you can't withhold recess or playtime as a form of punishment, which is often what kids need. They need to get the wiggles out, and withholding that just creates more wiggles and more behavioral issues, or adult issues, I would say. All right, so seclusion room. A little bit about this because it's coming up this upcoming legislative session. We have sensory rooms, which are great. Those are rooms with comfy furniture. The adult is in the room with you. There's probably some nice music. It's quiet. Those are completely fine. Those are legal. Seclusion rooms are rooms like the one on the right. This is a room in Minnesota. We didn't want to shame anyone in Minnesota for the seclusion room, so that's not in Minnesota, but that is an actual seclusion room where it has a door that is held tight or locked. And the kid has to stay in there by themselves. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of people who are in early learning who are like, oh no, separation issues, separation trauma. So yes, absolutely. So the law says that a seclusion room has to be 6 feet by 5 feet. That's 4 yoga mats together. There have been 3,938 seclusions done to 730 students in Minnesota last year. So that's about 24 seclusions a day. About 75% of all seclusions were done to children younger than 10 years old. Kids younger than 5 experience seclusions more than students older than 15. And seclusions, again, are done disproportionately to students of color. Staff and students are regularly injured as seclusion. So again, the reason why I'm bringing this up, we banned this. This is the first school year where you cannot put a child in pre-K through 3rd grade in seclusions. But it is going to be a topic for this upcoming legislative session because there are legislators who are on both sides of the aisle who are interested in removing that ban. Oh yes, we're good. I got the 2-minute warning and I'm closing out here. So if you have any more questions, happy to answer those. And we'll be, I'll also just be around if you want to ask me any questions about this or any other topic. But I always close out every presentation with my favorite quote from my personal hero, Baird Rustin, right-hand person to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who says, we need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers. And I would hope for all of you to be that group of angelic troublemakers. So thank you so much.
I'm actually going to leave that slide up as we close this out. Thank you so much, Josh, for your thoughts on what we need to do to support young children who are experiencing trauma as we think about public policy. So a couple of takeaways for me. Equity is not the goal. Justice, that's what we're trying to do. And then this, angelic troublemakers. I'm all about the angelic troublemakers. So huge thank you again. If you can just join me in thanking our entire panel here. And then we have a couple of minutes here where we can take some questions for from the audience. We have folks that have microphones if anybody has a question. I see somebody in the back. And if you can wait for the microphone. And who raised your hand? Yeah, Marie's coming so we can get you.
How is the State Department of Education prepared to act when our great leader starts deporting immigrants?
I think you got to turn it on.
Okay. Oh yes, there it is. Well, I will say that the question was as how the Department of Education responding. I could just say generally around the president-elect, the campaign trail and the policies that were, put forward and frankly very xenophobic. I'm a child of an immigrant. I wouldn't be sitting here if we didn't have fair immigration policies doing this work. They're already impacting the way that we're thinking about education policy at the Capitol and at the department. One of the big initiatives that we've been working on is creating affordable college. We passed the North Star Promise, giving free college to any family that makes less than $70,000 a year. But in order to do that, you have to fill out your FAFSA. And Minnesota is one of the worst states that has FAFSA completion rates. So trying to get kids to enroll FAFSA is very difficult. If you are undocumented, you can't complete the FAFSA. And that is one way that President-elect Trump is thinking about mass deportations, is looking at who is not enrolling through FAFSA. And and now we're taking a step back and saying, we want to make college affordable for every single student in the state of Minnesota, including undocumented students, but we can't require or even push FAFSA completion because we're so worried about what that means for our communities. So yes, it's having major impacts on the way that we think about policies. That's just one of them.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you've all shared today. I just have a kind of a practical question. I really appreciated what you said about not having kids to feel like they're in trouble necessarily, when something's happening. However, I have seen young children, or just even up to elementary, like 5th grade, who kind of play the system a bit, who know if I do this outburst, I get to what I want. And they can't touch me, they can't yell at me, that I can run and do whatever because they don't want to follow what the other classmates are having to do or pay attention. What is your thoughts or tips about the difference between not making them feel, like they're in trouble, but holding them accountable for their actions where they don't just play the system?
You want to think about it for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll chime in.
I think my mic is on. Yeah, there we go. So one of you said practicality. So I think one of the practical strategies in this, there's two parts to it. One is called compassionate accountability. I don't know if folks have heard of this. It works really well. On one end, you still want to hold the young person accountable for the things they did, but also on the other end, have some compassion for why they're doing what they're doing and being able to explain what you're doing. Now, what you explained is something that I've seen. It's kind of a cultural phenomenon. I would say it's an urban child cultural phenomenon. And what that means and what that's called in the community is finessing. They've learned how to finesse a system, utilize a behavior to get out of something because they know what the accountability response is going to be. And what I've done and what I've trained other folks to do is lean into that. It's okay to acknowledge what is happening. I know you're doing that. I know you did what you did to get this result. And guess what? You're going to get it. But I also want to know that if you want this desired outcome, let's say it's to get out of class or to, not to do the assignment, that's fine. But there's another way to do this. Come talk to me. Build that connection, that rapport, that relationship, acknowledge the behavior and say, you don't have to do this. You don't have to get in trouble not to do this. If you need help, if you need some more time, if you need some assistance, just let me know. I'm here to help you. You don't have to get in trouble to avoid doing it this specific way. So again, compassionate accountability. If people want to Google that, there's all different types of approaches and strategies on how to utilize that.
And I was just going to add, in thinking about our friend Justice, that was something that we had to work on because he didn't want to be a part of large group time, for example. So when it was time to do large group time, he didn't want to be with a group of 15 other kids. That was too overwhelming, too overstimulating for him. But he also thought, well, if I just run over here to the book area, it's fine. I don't have to do what I need to do. So teachers saw that a few times, and in communication with him and conversations with him, this is the expectation. We do have to do group time. How do you want to do that? Do you want to sit with a teacher? Do you want to sit in a cube chair? Do you want to take a break? So it's in communication. It's not, I lost my word. It's not you can do whatever you want to do type thing. There are still parameters to the expectations.
And just a real quick answer for the system side. When we passed the policies to ban suspensions for our youngest learners, we said that you have to use non-exclusionary practices before you use any exclusionary practices. And so when educators were like, okay, great, so I can't use suspension, I have to use something else. What is that other thing? What's the tool that I need? We created a market for that, right? So now educators are like, what are the non-exclusionary practices that I can be using? And now there are new kind of training programs and initiatives that have come about because there's now a market for non-exclusionary practices.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am in recognition of time. We're going to close out the event, but I just want to, afterwards, folks can come up and ask some additional questions. I just want to really extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you. The fact that you all chose to join us here on a Wednesday morning just really demonstrates the collective dedication we have to making sure that we are serving our young children here in Minnesota. So thank you so much. A special thank you to our amazing speakers here, Brandon Jones, Angie, Clair, and Josh Crosson. Your insightful presentations have really, I think, helped move this conversation. For those of you that are interested in exploring the Think Small Institute's Hurting to Healing modules, if you want to see Jamie Bonzik, Jamie's got her hand over there. 80 by 3 has quite a few scholarships so that you're able to take those modules if you are interested in taking those. And as we move forward, again, let's just carry the insights that we've gained today into our work and into our communities. Thank you so much, and safe travels.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. It's amazing.